In this video, we will construct a simple operating budget together. So uh, consider Carroll Clinic. They are trying to construct their 2011 operating budget, which will be created at the end of 2010. So remember, this is part of the planning process, and we're trying to forecast what the budget will be for next year. There's 4 parts to a operating budget. You have to make volume assumptions, revenue assumptions, cost assumptions, and after those 3 assumptions are made, you can finally generate your profit and loss statement. And so if you'll recall from the first video in this week, the volume assumptions that you make are end up being components of the statistics budget. The revenue assumptions you make end up being the revenue budget. The cost assumptions you make end up being the expense budget. And finally, the profits, which are a combination of everything, form the operating budget. So the first step is to make volume assumptions. Carroll Clinic has estimated that there will be 36,000 visits from the fee-for-service population. So this is probably a number that they've taken looking at historical trends on the numbers of visits from the fee-for-service patients that they've had in the past. They also expect to have 30,000 capitated members. Now, it would be nice to turn these capitated members into the number of visits so that everything can be consistent. So if there's 30,000 members, that means that there's 30,000 times 12 member months. So there's 360,000 member months. So remember, capitation pays on a per member per month basis, so that's why we want to convert things to a member month level. They've assumed that the utilization per member month is 0.15 visits. So essentially, maybe looking at past data, they find that each member visits on average 0.15 times per month. That's what that number means. And so to convert the number of capitated lives to number of visits, we just do 30,000 number of members times 12 months times 0.15 visit per month, and that gives us 54,000 visits that are expected from capitated members. All right, so we have a total of 90,000 visits from both the fee-for-service and the capitated patients. The next step is to forecast revenues. So you forecast revenues using your expectations on the volume in addition to your pricing expectations. So here, for the fee-for-service patients, we know that they pay on a per-visit basis, and Carroll Clinic will charge them or expects to charge them $25 per visit. So if there's 36,000 visits from the fee-for-service patients, multiply that by 25, and we get a total of $900,000 of revenue that are coming from fee-for-service patients. Now, capitated patients will be paying Carroll Clinic based on the number of member months and not based on the number of visits. And as a result, we have to figure out how much revenue is coming from capitated lives differently than how we figured out how much revenue is coming from fee-for-service visits. So Carroll Clinic expects to charge members $3 per month to be covered. And from the previous slide, we know that there's 30,000 members that are expected. So 30,000 times 12 is 360,000 member months. So that means that from the capitated lives, we expect a revenue of $3 per member month times 360,000 member months, giving us a total of $1,080,000. Now, you just add the revenue components of the fee-for-service patients together with the revenue from the capitated patients to get total revenues of $1.98 million. All right, the third step is to look at costs or expenses. So similarly, we're going to use the forecasts of the volume in addition to your expectations on fixed and variable costs to figure out what are the expenses that Carroll Clinic needs to make in order to provide these services. So let's start with the variable costs. And I think it's important to separate out variable costs from fixed costs in order to have greater clarity on where costs are being driven, or what is driving costs. So for the variable cost, you can break this out into several different components. Here we're just looking at labor and supplies. I think those are your two main categories. So the labor costs, Carroll Clinic has estimated that they need about 48,000 hours to provide care to all of their patients, the fee-for-service and their capitated patients. With 48,000 hours of labor hours with a wage at $25 per hour, that means that labor costs will total to $1.2 million. Now, in addition to labor, you need supplies, and these supplies, Carroll Clinic expects there to be 100,000 units of supplies, each costing $1.50 per unit, making the supply cost $150,000. You can imagine other variable costs being included here. So labor costs might be separated out into physician wage or technician wage, the nurse's wage, etc. All right, so now that we have the total variable cost, which is just summing over the labor variable cost and the supplies cost, which is $1.35 million, we can calculate the variable cost per visit using the forecasted number of visits. So if you remember from a few slides ago, this one right here, we expected a total of 90,000 visits from everyone, our fee-for-service and our capitated patients. All right, so with 90,000 visits and a total of 1.35 million in variable costs, we divide the two numbers and we find that the variable cost per visit is $15. We can also do the fixed cost estimation. So fixed costs will be things like the direct fixed costs, so your equipment, your plant, where the building is, the physical location, and also your overhead costs that are allocated, that need to be allocated. And for Carroll Clinic, they've estimated fixed cost to be $500,000. So now we have an expectation for costs for 2011. Okay, finally, combining the revenue section with the cost section, we can create the profitability, the projected profitability for Carroll Clinic in 2011. So this is the last step in the operating budget, and what you see here is the forecasted profit and loss statement. So we have the revenues, which are broken down into the fee-for-service versus capitated revenues, and we have the costs, which are broken down into the variable costs and the fixed costs. Because we have the number of visits for fee-for-service versus capitated members, we can look at the variable costs by for fee-for-service patients, the variable cost for capitated patients separately as well, in order to get greater clarity on who is on sort of the revenue versus cost streams that you expect from fee-for-service versus capitation.